What's up, Archons? I'm Flightless Pheasant, and now that you're here, we can dig into the meat and potatoes of the juicy, delicious lore bits that are scattered all throughout the recently released Aember Skies set. But before we do, I'm a huge fan of Keyforge, and if you are too, then please like, subscribe, and hit the bell, as I'll be bringing you even more lore from Keyforge and the Crucible. Today I'm going to be taking you through some of my favorite and least favorite cards in the Aember Skies set. Mostly for lore reasons, being me. But we're going to go through it kind of one at a time in various groups, and we're going to go over the different things that we find. I'm going to start by doing a bunch of cards that reference things outside of Keyforge. As we all know, Keyforge has a really cheeky way of referencing other things from other media, and I feel like it's great to spotlight these things when we come across them. So I'm going to take us down a list of those first, then we're going to do some internal Keyforge references, and then just some things that I thought were really cool and interesting. First up on the list of cards with external references is the Brobnar card Raise Your Glass, which has a actual line quoted from the song by Pink, Raise Your Glass. In fact, it's one of my absolute favorite lines from the song. You know, the we'll never be anything but loud and nitty-gritty, dirty little freaks. Alright, Ghost Galaxy, you gotta stop doing songs because you're gonna make me sing more. I don't know if anybody wants that. The next one I caught is on the Brobnar upgrade Strength Within. And if that right there isn't a Super Saiyan transformation from the Dragon Ball series, then, well, I haven't watched as much anime as I thought I did. Seriously, at least this card doesn't force the creature to spend the next 3 turns exhausted while it builds up its power before its big attack. Next up, we have the Dis upgrade Pendra's box, which I'm fairly certain is a reference to Greek mythology's Pandora's box. They both sort of have a similar vibe of being careful what you wish for. Even the flavor text of Pendra's box promises you'll have all the amber you could ever desire. It's just all going to be on your creatures instead of in your pool. Next up, we have the Aquaidan creature Game Changer, making a very ominous reference to one of the most famous lines from Darth Vader of the Star Wars series. He gets the quote a little bit wrong, but you can definitely see the similarities, and it has a very similar sort of ominous feeling to it. The next reference is the Logos creatures Captain Nemo and the Nautilus, both of which are references to the Jules Verne novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. In fact, in the novel, Captain Nemo is the captain of the Nautilus, which is his highly advanced submarine that he uses to create his own underwater empire of sorts. It's a very good book, and I strongly recommend it. Next up is the Logos creature Command Prompt, who is a reference to the computer command windows that you can use to input command prompts into your PC. I am insufficient techie to understand all of that very well, but I got the reference. Next up, the flavor text of Empyrean Charge, which says, "The best laid plans o' cyborgs and robots," is a direct reference to a quote from the novel of Mice and Men. We're doing a lot of novels this time around, but they're all really incredible. This one's by John Steinbeck, and I strongly recommend this one as well. Next up is Cobalt Capulet. I'm a little less certain of this one than I would be if there was a, say, Onyx Montague, but I think this is a reference to the House Capulet and House Montague of the William Shakespeare play Romeo and Juliet fame. I really was hoping that we would see, like, an Iron Montague or something like that in the set, and when we didn't, it made me a little less sure of the reference, but I still think I'm right on this one. Next up is the Mars Action Sharkbait, which probably has my favorite reference in this entire set. So the flavor text of Sharkbait is "Ooh-ha-ha," which is a reference to Finding Nemo, one of the best scenes in the movie when they're all dressed up in tiki uniforms and they're inducting Nemo into their group, and it's Sharkbait, ooh-ha-ha. Next up is the Skyborn creature Amber Earhart, who is a reference to Amelia Earhart, the real-life historical explorer who went missing somewhere over the Bermuda Triangle while trying to circumnavigate the globe. It's a really neat story. I encourage you to look into it. This next one might be a little bit of a stretch, but I'm pretty sure the Black Tempest from the Skyborn house is a reference to the Black Pearl, which is Captain Jack Sparrow's ship from the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. I mean, they look kind of similar to me. I don't know. What do you think? The next reference I caught was actually a little hard to pin down, but Red Skies is a reference to a poem or group of poems that were broadly referred to as Red Skies at Night, sometimes Red Skies at Night Sailor's Delight, sometimes Shepherd's Delight, and the most famous version I was able to find is a song version by The Fix. But yeah, this seems to be like an old folklore kind of thing, and it's a really neat reference, but it was kind of hard to pin down. Next up is probably the most surprising reference in this set, and that is Scalawag Finn. His flavor text says, "I can do this all day," which, if you've watched any of the Marvel movies, you know is basically Captain America's tagline, catchphrase, but yeah, that's kind of an interesting parallel to make with this particular card. And last, we have Treasure Island, Flint's Legend, Flint's Map, and Flint's Stash, which are all references to the novel Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. Like I said, we did a lot of novels this time, but it feels appropriate to end on this one because it had so many cards, and also this one's an excellent book I strongly recommend reading. These next group of cards reference other cards in Keyforge, and sometimes even give us extra insights into what has happened in the time that we've been away from the game between sets. To start this one off, we're going to start with Narplet. Narplet is canonically stated to be the daughter of Narp, who I believe is now dead since she seems to be putting flowers upon his grave. It's a little unfortunate that we'll never see our old friend Narp again, but I guess most of us aren't going to shed any tears. Next is De-Animator, which doesn't have a direct reference to the artifact Animator, but since De-Animator is a creature that makes creatures into artifacts, and Animator is an artifact that makes artifacts into creatures, the reference seems pretty self-explanatory to me. And then the last one in this category is Demonic Shelf. This one took me a minute to track down, and I wasn't able to figure out all of the things that are depicted on Demonic Shelf, but I was able to find 3 of them. So, in his hand, he's holding Calvin, who is a Star Alliance creature, or one of the ones that can sometimes be an upgrade. And on the shelf next to that, you can see what appears to be a suit of Titan armor. At first I thought this was Titan Guardian, but now I think it's actually the Titan armor suit that's being created in the Titan Outpost art. And then the last one I was able to identify is the Saurian creature down in the corner. That is Aristotle Mimas. The other creatures here I wasn't able to identify, but if you can figure them out, I'd actually be really interested to know what they are. Alright. Now we're going to look at a couple of Skyborn cards that I found really interesting and I feel like I want to talk about. Since Skyborn is the new house, it seems appropriate to give them a little bit of time to shine. And the first one I want to talk about is actually Arrow O'Fair. Arrow O'Fair is a leader from the Skyborn house, but as I'll talk about when I do my Skyborn house breakdown sometime in the near future, Skyborn probably is going to have a number of different leaders, but the big thing I want to call out on Arrow O'Fair is I believe he's most likely the successor of Captain Flint, as he seems to now be the leader of the Stormkin, the same way Flint was in the past. Speaking of Captain Flint, you see here Cloudburst Command, and I wonder to myself if that isn't Flint's old ship. I mean, it might be the Black Tempest, but something about Cloudburst Command just really feels like more of a flagship of the Stormkin. But I could be wrong on this one. It just really stuck out to me as the kind of thing that might be like an older flagship of the Stormkin before it was taken over by its new leader. And then the last thing I want to call out is the creature Han Peregrine, who appears to be a Saurian member of House Skyborn. But he's also listed as a Stormkin and is in his art depicted giving away money, which is not a very piratey thing to do, since the Stormkin are supposed to basically be sky pirates. Maybe there's more to this story than is immediately apparent, but it definitely caught my eye to find a creature with the Stormkin trait giving away his hard-earned wares. The next category of cards we're going to talk about are cards with interesting traits that either imply something about the setting, or give us information we didn't have before, or are otherwise just really interesting to look at. And for this one, I'm going to start with Brunks and Bongle. While it's not uncommon in Keyforge for us to see cards where the trait references multiple creatures in the art, see Siphonopterian as an example, I do really love that Bronx and Bongle gets both the Goblin and Giant trait to represent the two creatures who work together to make up that one entity, as it were. The next group of creatures whose trait I find interesting is actually a brand new trait, and that's the Recruiter trait, which I think is super neat as a trait. So this one ended up on Fancy Donovan, Vested Herald, Serene, Colonel Slime, Brillix Ponder, Eldest Batchminder, and Bosun Kreen, who you will notice all have house enhancement pips on them. While that in itself is interesting, I really like the idea of a recruiter trait because it implies that many houses are always trying to bring in new members. And while this makes more sense for some houses than others, I still think it's a really neat inclusion. Alright, now I want to call out another couple of Brobnar creatures. This is going to be Reince Furyheart and Nagu Yani. The reason I want to call these out is because although the lore states that there are several humans in Brobnar, these are only the second and third we've ever seen, with the first being Flamewake Shaman. I'm actually really excited to see more humans in Brobnar, since theoretically there's no reason why there shouldn't be quite a few of them, especially given that goblins, who are much weaker than giants, run around in House Brobnar all the time, so why can't humans? Speaking of humans in houses we don't normally see them in, we've got Infernal Terran, who's a human in Dis, which is really strange. I had to kind of bend my brain around this one a little bit, but with the help of someone I talked at Keyforge Celebrations, I do have a bit of a theory on what's going on here. I'll talk about it a little more when we get further along, but I actually think that Dis might be diversifying a little bit, and that House Dis might be gaining some new members that Lord Invidious and the demons might not even really fully acknowledge, but that still work towards the similar cause. Either way, this sparked an awful lot of curiosity in me, and I'm interested to see where Humans in Dis goes. Next up, I want to talk about a pair of Dis creatures that ended up with an interesting trait. So this is Suspendamander and Ven Omok, who both ended up with the Beast trait, and they didn't end up with the Imp trait. The Imp trait is a lot more common in House Dis. In fact, in the past, the only beasts we had were Buzzle and Rotgrub, who both have this sort of very slug-like appearance, and Ven Omok and Suspendamander look like they have more in common with some of the imps from House Dis. So I'm a little interested to see what the creatures of House Dis that aren't imps or demons are, and how they're distinct from the ones that are imps and demons. Next up, we have Titan Apparition, which has the Cyborg trait in addition to the Spectre trait, which I find really interesting because this, to me, definitely looks like reanimated Logos Titan Cyborg armor, which is super interesting because I wonder if Geistoid's capable of reanimating the biological bits of the cyborg or only the robotic ones and replacing the rest with ectoplasm. It looks like maybe that's the case, that only the robot parts are brought back and the biological bits are replaced with ectoplasm, but still very interesting to see that Geistoid might be able to reanimate the technology of other houses in its future appearances. Next is R.M. Fuller, who has the insect and AI traits. Logos has only ever had one other insect, and that was Psychic Bug. So it's kind of interesting to see another insect in Logos, but for me what's more interesting is I'm fairly certain this is a reference to it being a computer bug, or perhaps even a computer worm, which I think is kind of a neat little techno nod. And the last creature with an interesting trait I want to talk about is Eldest Batchminder. I mentioned him earlier when I was talking about the Recruiter trait, but his other trait is Elder, which is the first time we've ever gotten the Elder trait on a creature in House Mars. We've gotten a lot of soldiers in the past, but this is the first one with the Elder trait, which I don't know if that heralds the coming of future creatures with the Elder trait, or maybe even like Elder Tribal, especially now that they have officially won the Martian Civil War, but it opens up a door of possibilities that I find highly interesting. Alright, so we've still got some of the coolest lore things to go over, but before we do that, I do want to highlight a couple of lore fails. I didn't go over any lore fails last time I did one of these videos because honestly it didn't really feel like it needed it, but this time around there are a couple things that just feel a little too egregious to not draw attention to. So on that topic, I'm going to start with the least egregious of them, and that is Phantasmaquid not being a sky beast. Come on, guys, look at it. That's definitely a sky beast. It's got almost nothing in common with normal Dis creatures, and it definitely looks like it's one of the giant monsters that flies around in the sky. This might be because Aember Skies experienced some pretty significant restructuring late in its development, but either way, it ended up being a lore fail for me. Moving up the egregiousness scale, we have Skippy the Glorious, who I was sure had something to do with Skippy Timehog, since they're both from the same set and both named Skippy, but I scoured the art and flavor text, and guys, I can't find any connection. And I'm forced to assume that there's no relationship between these two cards, which is a huge letdown, given that Skippy the Glorious had the opportunity to be an amazing reference to a card that we all really enjoyed the last time it was in this game. And at the top notch of the egregiousness lore fail scale, we have Change Agent and Moonlight Special. So for me, the lore fail here is these two Getrukia depicted in this art, their arms are wrong. I'm not entirely sure with Moonlight Special, but I'm entirely sure with Change Agent that that is not the correct combination of arms for a Getrukia. And since their unique asymmetrical bodies are their defining characteristic in Keyforge, it seems like a significant oversight to not enforce a style guide on these two cards. All I can really say on these is do better, Ghost Galaxy. I love your original creature creations, and I love how special and unique they are, but that really only holds up as long as you enforce a style guide. Okay, to kind of cleanse our palate a little bit before we move into the actual really cool lore stuff, I do want to call out a card that I couldn't figure out where it could fit in the rest of this video, so I'm just going to put it here because it's kind of just fun. I love Dat. You know why I love Dat? Because if you want to play Dat, you start your turn by saying Dis and Dat. That's just fun. That's just a fun start to a turn. There's nothing else to that. It's just enjoyable. Okay, so now we're set to get into the really interesting lore stuff. Are you ready? Strap yourselves in. I'm going to start with a couple of things I didn't know about House Dis and a theory that I have formulated based on this new information. The first is Serene seems to imply that the members of House Dis are branded with the symbol of House Dis, and that's further enforced by Fiendish Apprentice showing a creature with a House Dis brand on its arm. It also implies that House Dis has an interest in infiltrating other houses, which is something it's never been depicted caring about before. But if you combine this with the presence of Infernal Terran, it starts to form a theory that I actually find kind of interesting. And that is, perhaps there is a fanatical cult of humans who believe they can gain the favor of the demons of Dis by performing disruptive or dangerous acts that cause high emotions, because those events will cause the demons to show up. And even though the humans have no way of communicating with the demons, they've determined that this is a show of favor of some kind. If this is the case, it might open the door to something I didn't think was possible, and that would be a second leader in House Dis. That leader being the head of the cult. And even though they would have no direct affiliation with Lord Invidious or the larger structure of the house, it would still put them aligned with the house's goals, and I think that could be a really interesting plotline to explore. While we're talking about House Dis, when this set's house lineup was first announced, I really thought Dis just didn't belong in the lineup, since they're supposed to be from like a subterranean world, and this whole set is supposed to take place in the sky. But then we got to look at Talon of Invidious, and my whole opinion changed. I love Talon of Invidious. I love the idea that it's just a chunk of the realm of Dis that has been lifted up into the sky so that Invidious and his various troops can just swarm across the sky realm. Honestly, it pivoted my whole opinion. This card was an excellent inclusion. We also got some new shards in this set, and I love the shard cards. I feel like they're great encapsulations of a house, with the name of the shard giving you an idea of how other houses perceive that house, and the flavor text giving you an idea of how the house perceives itself. And I think the new shards, all three of them, follow that to a T. So we have Shard of Change for House Aquiden, and its flavor text is Forged from Negotiation. Love it. Then we have Shard of Resurgence for House Geistoid, and its flavor text says Forged from Renewal. Geistoid sees itself as renewing that which has been left behind, and everyone else sees it as just a surge of death and reanimated garbage. Perfect. And finally, from House Skyborn, we have Shard of Courage, with the flavor text Forged from Freedom. I just love the shards, guys. From a lore perspective, I could not ask for more, and these three are excellent inclusions to the already prolific Shard series. Next, I want to talk about Chandler Anouk and Efficient Amber Burner, which give us a new term in the Keyforge terminology, and that is the Amber Burner, which is apparently a catch-all term for any engine fueled by amber, which is great to know because that's probably one of the most common types of engines on the Crucible, because as we know, many species use amber as an energy source, and so I actually like knowing what that term is, and these two cards both give us that term explicitly. Next, I want to talk about stealth modifications real quick. It looks to me like what's happening here is some Martians are painting on cyber paint that causes their ship to enter stealth mode. That's nuts. If Mars can just, like, paint on a cyber motif and then things become invisible or untraceable, that's wacky, but, like, so appropriate for Mars? I don't know. This card just really caught me off guard. And then there's Crepuscular Rays. So, on top of being just an incredibly good card, this card also made something potentially clear to me that I didn't think about before, and that is maybe amber can take the form of light? Probably light particles and not light waves, but this is clearly supposed to be amber in light form, which is nuts. I mean, I know amber can be liquid, it can be solid, it can be gas, but I never thought that it could be plasma, I guess? Just really wild. Alright, the last card I really want to talk about is probably, like, the most interesting thing to come out of Aember Skies, and that's Navigator Qatar. So Navigator Qatar introduces a new alien species called the Jareen, which is super interesting to me because I was reading all of the lore blurbs as Aember Skies was building up, and in it mentions that Flint went to the Lord Jareen to build Flint's map. Now, I assumed the Lord Jareen was an Archon, but since it's actually a species, I'm super interested to see more out of them. Like, I mean, I get that they're supposed to be, like, expert cartographers and navigators, but, like, I don't know, just this really neat insectoid creature really catches my attention, and I'm hopeful that we're not done seeing Jareens in future sets. So those are all of my lore picks for Aember Skies. Tell me what you think. Are there any cards with interesting flavor text, art, or implications that I missed that you really wanted me to talk about? Are there any of these that you didn't notice yourself that I was able to bring to your attention? Is there anything else interesting that you wish I had gone over that I may have skipped by? Go ahead and put it down in the comments and we'll talk about it, but I really enjoy going through these sets to try to tease out all the little lore bits that I can get my hands on. It really is a lot of fun. You might have noticed I didn't talk about any of the Sky Beasts. I intend to give them their own video where I'll go over the lore bits that are interesting for them in a future time. So look forward to that. And then I also didn't talk about Tokens of Change, but it'll get its own lore picks when the time comes. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to doing my Houses of the Crucible Skyborn video. I hope you guys really enjoyed this look through the lore in Aember Skies as my favorite game's lore continues to evolve and be interesting and engaging. I really want to say thank you, Ghost Galaxy, because I know it's really easy to let lore for a big game like this fall to the wayside when you've got kind of a smaller team, and I think that the lore of this game is part of what drives at least me to engage with it on the level that I do. So keep the good things coming. But that's all I have for you today, so until next time, later, Archons.